Before the Ballon d'Or, before the Champions League, before the world knew the name Kaka, there was simply Ricardo. A boy growing up in São Paulo with a football at his feet and a dream quietly taking shape. Unlike many football legends, Ricardo didn't grow up chasing football to escape poverty. He grew up surrounded by love, stability, and parents who believed that education mattered just as much as the game. Every school day taught him discipline. Every afternoon with a football taught him joy. Long before he became a footballer, Ricardo was learning the values that would define the man he would become. On local pitches across São Paulo, football wasn't a job or a way out. It was where he felt most alive. Every touch of the ball made the dream feel just a little closer. Through every training session came laughter, friendships, and unforgettable moments. Before the pressure, the trophies, and the expectations, he was simply a teenager who loved the game. Ricardo's greatest advantage wasn't money or talent. It was the home he came back to every evening. Around this table, he learned faith, humility, and gratitude, values that would stay with him long after the trophies arrived. As the sun disappeared behind the streets of São Paulo, Ricardo often found himself alone with his thoughts. Every training session brought him a little closer to his dream, but life has a way of changing our plans when we least expect it. At home, there were no shortcuts. His parents taught him that success was earned through discipline, humility, and gratitude. Those values shaped Ricardo long before football ever made him famous. As the sun disappeared behind the streets of São Paulo, Ricardo often found himself alone with his thoughts. Every training session brought him a little closer to his dream, but life has a way of changing our plans when we least expect it. It was supposed to be just another ordinary afternoon, a day filled with laughter, friends, and the carefree moments every teenager should enjoy. But sometimes, the moments that change our lives forever begin like any other. It happened in a moment that seemed completely ordinary. Ricardo dived into the pool, unaware that the next few seconds would change the direction of his life. What began as laughter with friends would end with fear, uncertainty, and a question no young footballer ever expects to face. Would he ever play again? As doctors worked to save Ricardo's future, another battle was unfolding just outside the hospital room. His parents could do nothing but wait. Every passing minute felt like an eternity. Their son had come frighteningly close to a life-changing spinal injury, and no one knew what the outcome would be. For the first time, football didn't matter. All that mattered was that he. In the silence of that hospital room, Ricardo found something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. His faith. While football was suddenly uncertain, his belief wasn't. As he waited to heal, he leaned on the Bible beside his bed, trusting that even if he couldn't see the path ahead, Jesus already could. Years later, Kaka would often say that football was never the foundation of his life. Faith was. Against all odds, Ricardo walked out of the hospital. Doctors had warned how close he had come to a devastating spinal injury, but he had been given something far greater than a second chance at football. He had been given a second chance at life. From that day forward, every match, every goal, and every trophy would carry a deeper meaning. He no longer played simply because he loved the game. He played because he believed he'd been given another chance to live it. Recovery didn't mark the end of Ricardo's dream. It marked the beginning of it. With every step back onto the training ground, he carried a new perspective. Football was no longer something to take for granted, it was a gift. Standing on the pitch once again, the dream that had almost slipped away suddenly felt more real than ever. Every touch of the ball carried a new sense of purpose. There were no cameras, no cheering crowds, no guarantees, just a young man, a football, and countless hours of quiet work. Ricardo understood that miracles might open a door, but discipline was what carried you through it. Day after day, he rebuilt not only his body, but the confidence that one day he would wear the São Paulo first team shirt. It didn't take long for people to notice. Back at São Paulo, Ricardo wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong, he was simply giving everything he had. Every training session became another opportunity to improve, and every drill was completed with the same quiet determination that had carried him through recovery. The coaches saw more than talent. They saw maturity, humility, and a young player whose greatest strength wasn't his feet, it was his character. One conversation can change a career. After another impressive training session, Ricardo was called aside by one of the coaches. It wasn't a long speech or a dramatic moment. Just quiet belief. The message was simple. Keep working, stay patient, and your opportunity will come. For Ricardo, those words meant everything. He had survived the greatest setback of his young life. Now, for the first time, someone at São Paulo was beginning to see not just the player he was, but the player he could become. Months of hard work had earned Ricardo something every young footballer dreams about. He was called into the manager's office. There was no dramatic speech or grand celebration, just a simple message that would change his life forever. São Paulo believed he was ready. After everything he had overcome, the club wasn't just giving him an opportunity. They were placing their trust in him. Signing that contract wasn't just about becoming a professional footballer. It was the reward for years of sacrifice, discipline, and unwavering belief. Beside him sat the two people who had supported every dream, every setback, and every step of the journey. For Ricardo, this wasn't simply his signature on a piece of paper. It was a promise to honor the faith his parents had placed in him, the trust São Paulo had shown him, and the second chance at life he knew he had been given. Before he ever kicked a ball for São Paulo's first team, there was one moment Ricardo would never forget. Standing alone in the dressing room, he held the shirt he had dreamed about since he was a boy. It wasn't just fabric stitched together with a club badge. It represented every early morning, every setback, every prayer, and every sacrifice that had brought him to this moment. For the first time, the dream wasn't in the distance anymore. He could finally hold it in his hands. Walking into the first team dressing room was both exciting and intimidating. These weren't academy teammates anymore. They were established professionals, players Ricardo had looked up to for years. He listened more than he spoke, eager to learn. Every footballer dreams of this moment. The roar of the crowd, the lights, the badge on your chest. But for Ricardo, this night wasn't about making headlines. It was about patience, sitting on the bench, watching, learning, and waiting for the opportunity he had worked his entire life to earn. He wasn't frustrated by the wait. After everything he had overcome, simply being there was already proof that dreams really could come true. Then, the moment finally arrived. The manager walked over, looked Ricardo in the eyes, and gave him the instructions every young footballer dreams of hearing. It was time. Months earlier, he had wondered if he would ever play football again. Now, he was just moments away from making his professional debut for São Paulo. The wait was over. Everything he had endured had led to this exact moment. The fourth official raised the board, and with it, a childhood dream became reality. As Ricardo stepped toward the touchline, the noise of the stadium seemed to fade away. Years of sacrifice, recovery, and relentless hard work had led to this single moment. In a matter of seconds, he would no longer be a promising academy player. He would become a professional footballer for São Paulo Football Club. And before long, the football world would know him by a name that would become unforgettable. Kaka. As soon as he stepped onto the pitch, Ricardo looked completely at home. There was no panic, no fear of making mistakes. Just the same calmness that had defined him since he first kicked a ball as a child. He played with confidence beyond his years, gliding past opponents with effortless elegance. It was immediately clear that São Paulo hadn't simply promoted another academy player. They had uncovered a special talent. Few inside the stadium knew it that night, but they were watching the first steps of a future Ballon d'Or winner. Ricardo needed only a few moments to announce himself. Playing with a confidence far beyond his years, he brought energy, composure, and creativity every time the ball reached his feet. The occasion never overwhelmed him, it inspired him. Before long, the stadium erupted. His teammates rushed to celebrate, knowing they had witnessed something special. It wasn't just another promising youngster making his debut. It was the beginning of a career that would soon capture the hearts of Brazil, and eventually, the world. Only months earlier, Ricardo had wondered if he would ever play football again. Now, he was sprinting across the Morumbi pitch with thousands of fans celebrating around him. His dream had become reality. The boy who nearly lost everything had. As the stadium erupted around him, Ricardo's first instinct wasn't to celebrate himself. It was to give thanks. The boy who had once lain in a hospital bed, uncertain if he would ever play again, was now standing under the lights of the Morumbi, living the dream he had almost lost. For Kaka, every goal was more than a footballing achievement. It was a reminder that his life had been given back to him for a reason. The world was beginning to discover an extraordinary footballer, but those who knew him best already understood. His greatest strength had never been his talent. It was his faith. While the dressing room celebrated another famous victory, Ricardo sat quietly, taking it all in. He wasn't thinking about the applause or the headlines. His mind drifted back to the hospital bed, to the uncertainty, to the prayer that had changed everything. Only a short time earlier, he had been fighting for the chance to play football again. Now he was living the dream he had once feared was gone forever. For Ricardo, success was never something to boast about. It was simply another reason to be grateful. It wasn't long before the rest of Brazil started paying attention. The newspapers couldn't stop talking about the young midfielder from São Paulo. Match after match, Kaka played with a maturity that seemed impossible for someone so young, combining elegance, intelligence, and a calmness that made the game look effortless. The headlines celebrated his talent, but those closest to him knew the real story. Behind every front page was a young man whose greatest victories had already been won long before the spotlight ever found him. Fame arrived faster than Ricardo ever expected. One week he was fighting for a place in the squad. The next, microphones were in front of him after every match, and the country wanted to know more about the young star lighting up São Paulo. But success never changed him. Even as the spotlight grew brighter, Ricardo answered every question with the same humility, always quick to praise his teammates, thank his family, and give credit to God before himself. It wasn't just his football that was winning people over. It was the person behind it. Despite becoming one of Brazil's brightest young stars, nothing changed when Ricardo walked through his front door. There were no celebrations of fame, no talk of money, just the same parents who had believed in him from the very beginning, proud not because he was becoming famous, but because he had remained the same son they had raised. For Ricardo, football was never bigger than family, and no matter how loud the stadium became, home would always be where he stayed grounded. Word spread quickly across Brazil. Scouts began filling the stands, notebooks open, watching every touch, every pass, every decision. They weren't searching for the strongest player. They were searching for the smartest. And every week, one quiet teenager kept giving him another reason to come back. Without chasing attention, Ricardo Kaka was becoming impossible to ignore. Soon, football was no longer just happening on the pitch. The phone started ringing. Agents, clubs, journalists, everyone wanted to know the name of the young midfielder who seemed years older than his age whenever he touched the ball. But while the football world hurried to claim the next Brazilian superstar, Ricardo remained calm. Every conversation, every opportunity, every decision was made with the same patience and guidance that had shaped him from the beginning. With every new opportunity came bigger decisions. Contracts, representatives, the future, but Ricardo was never left to face those moments alone. Around the table sat the people who had protected him long before the football world knew his name. Because this wasn't just about building a career, it was about making sure success would never cost him the values that had brought him there. For all the noise that surrounded his rise, Ricardo treasured moments like these the most. A quiet walk home, no cameras, no headlines, just time to think. He knew his life was changing faster than he had ever imagined. But deep down, the boy from São Paulo made himself one promise. No matter where football took him, he would never let success change who he was. Soon, another journey was waiting. Europe, a dream every Brazilian footballer imagined. As he packed his suitcase, Ricardo paused over the things that mattered most. His boots, his São Paulo shirt, a photograph of the people who had sacrificed everything for him, and the Bible that had guided him through every victory and every setback. He wasn't just leaving home to chase success. He was carrying home with him. The hardest goodbyes aren't always spoken. Sometimes they're felt. Inside that dressing room, Every teammate knew they were watching more than a transfer. They were saying goodbye to a friend. A player who never chased the spotlight, yet somehow became the heart of the team. Ricardo embraced each one of them, grateful for every lesson, every victory, and every moment they had shared. The next chapter would take him across the world, but a part of him would always belong to São Paulo. Then came the goodbye no young footballer is ever truly prepared for. One final embrace, one final promise to call home. His parents weren't just sending their son to Europe. They were trusting him to carry everything they had taught him into a world that could so easily change people. As Ricardo walked toward the departure gate, he wasn't leaving his family behind. He was carrying their love, their faith, and their values with every step. The next stop was Italy. And waiting. As the plane climbed above the clouds, Ricardo looked out of the window knowing nothing would ever be the same again. Below him was Brazil. Ahead of him was a country whose language he didn't speak, a league he'd never played in, and expectations bigger than anything he'd ever known. He wasn't just chasing a dream anymore. He was flying toward it. And somewhere beyond those clouds, AC Milan was waiting. The air felt colder, the streets were unfamiliar. For the first time in his life, Ricardo was thousands of kilometers from home. He had left behind everything he had ever known. His family, his language, and the club that had believed in him. Now he stood in Milan, a city where legends weren't discovered, they were made. Then he saw it, the San Siro, empty, silent, yet somehow it still carried the weight of every legend who had stepped onto that pitch before him. For a moment, Ricardo didn't say a word. He simply stood there, taking it all in, because dreams look very different when you're finally standing inside them. Training was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Every touch was judged. Every pass had to be perfect. Around him were players who had already conquered Europe, men who expected excellence every single day. There was no special treatment, no shortcuts. If Ricardo wanted to wear the famous red and black, he would have to earn it. When the training sessions ended and the stadium lights faded, another challenge began. Every evening, Ricardo sat down with notebooks instead of footballs. New words, new phrases, a new culture, because he understood something that many young players never do. If Milan was going to become his home, he first had to become part of Italy. Milan was more than football. It was history, it was culture, it was a city that had shaped some of the greatest players the game had ever known. As Ricardo walked its streets, he wasn't just discovering Italy. Every great player needs someone who sees their potential before the rest of the world does. For Ricardo, that person was Carlo Ancelotti. The legendary manager didn't just see talent. He saw character, humility, intelligence, and in the quiet conversations away from the cameras, a bond began to form. One that would help shape one of football's greatest careers. The adjustment wasn't easy. Italian football demanded more than talent. It demanded discipline, intelligence, patience. Every training session was another opportunity to prove he belonged. Slowly, the teammates who had once seen a young Brazilian began to see something else. A player capable of changing games. A player capable of changing history. This was the moment he had imagined thousands of times. The roar of the San Siro. The famous red and black shirt. The tunnel every footballer dreams of walking through. But dreams have a strange way of becoming reality. The moment you've waited for your entire life suddenly becomes the moment you have to prove you belong. Ricardo took one last breath, then stepped onto the stage where legends are made. Then, everything changed. The goals came naturally. The confidence grew with every touch. Supporters weren't just watching a gifted young midfielder anymore. They were witnessing someone who played football with joy, elegance, and complete freedom. Every celebration ended the same way, not pointing to himself, but pointing to the one he believed had given him the gift. Soon, the city that once felt unfamiliar began singing his name. Every goal was met with thunder. Every assist brought another roar. The San Siro had fallen in love with the quiet Brazilian who never chased the spotlight, yet somehow became the brightest light on the pitch. Then something extraordinary happened. It wasn't just the fans talking anymore. Italy's biggest newspapers couldn't stop writing about him. Headlines called him the new king of Milan. They praised his elegance, His humility, his impossible ability to make football look effortless. In a city built on legends, a quiet young Brazilian was becoming the next one. But through all the attention, very little about Kaka changed. The cameras followed him everywhere. Every interview wanted the same answer. How did this young Brazilian become one of the biggest names in football? He always smiled, always spoke with humility, because for Kaka, fame was never the destination. It was simply another opportunity to honor the gift he believed God had given him. Subscribe for more documentaries like this.